The forge had gone cold. Where once the hiss of metal and the rhythm of hammer had filled the cottage at the edge of Elderglen, now there was only the ticking of a crooked shutter and the faint groan of old timbers in the wind. Margaret lived alone now, widow to Thomas the metalsmith, once prized by the crown for his delicate filigree and legendary precision. His name had been etched into the guild records in gilded ink. Hers had never been spoken at all. Since his death, the world had shrunk. The garden fed her when it could. The neighbors, mostly out of pity, left bread at the step. But Margaret, proud even in grief, rarely accepted more than a nod. She wore the same gray cloak each season. Her hands, once nimble in silver and fire, were stiff with frost and hard labor. Yet behind the wear, something still lived. An ember, small and buried. It was hunger that finally pushed her through the village to the iron-banded gates of the Metalworkers' Guild. Not hunger of the body, though that too clung to her, but a hunger for meaning, for fire. She stood outside the heavy oaken door as the wind tugged at her skirt. Smoke curled from the chimneys above. From within came the familiar chorus, the sharp clank of hammers, the growl of bellows, the hiss of molten metal poured into form. She knocked. The door opened with a sigh, and the scent hit her. Copper, coal, ash, and sweat. It was almost holy to her. Inside, the guild bustled with movement. Apprentices darted between anvils, journeymen polished goblets and medallions under the watch of older men whose beards were dusted with ash and pride. Margaret stepped forward. Her voice, when it came, was thin but steady. "I seek work." A few heads turned. One man, large, ruddy-faced, his beard like a sooty curtain, looked up from his bench. This was Master Reynard, head of the Elderglen Guild. He squinted at her. "Speak up, woman." "I was wife to Thomas. I know the work. If there's anything, I can shape, I can polish, I can help." Reynard's eyes narrowed. A slow smirk spread across his face. "You? Help? You expect to cradle a crucible with those hands?" He barked a short laugh. "Perhaps you'd like to stir the silver with your wooden spoon." A few chuckles echoed behind him. No one offered her a bench. No one asked what she knew. Margaret's gaze dropped, not to hide her shame, but to examine a nearby work table. There, half forged, lay a silver goblet. Ornate, attempted, but imperfect. She tilted her head slightly, her fingers twitching. Reflex. That curve wasn't symmetrical. The edge lacked balance. Her hand made a small movement in the air, as if to correct it. But no one saw. Reynard waved her off like smoke. "There's no work here for widows and memories." She turned, slow and silent, and stepped back into the autumn wind. But as the door shut behind her and the guild noise faded, a single thought took root in her chest. Hard, cold, and unyielding. They think I am nothing. But I remember more than they've ever known. And in her palm, she imagined again the shape of that goblet. Not how it was made, but how it should have been. 3 days passed. Rain scoured the village roofs, and the forged chimneys burned longer than usual. Inside the guild hall, the mood had shifted. Gone was the easy rhythm of routine. In its place, tension. A royal courier had arrived at dawn, soaked and stern, bearing a scroll sealed with green wax, the king's personal mark. The message was read aloud in the center of the workshop, every eye fixed on the trembling parchment. By decree of His Majesty Aldemar, a ring is required, fashioned in gold. Upon it, the crest of the lost worm line, a design not seen since the Elder Court. No explanations, no sketches, just a date and a demand. The ring was to be delivered within 10 days, or the royal favor withdrawn. Reynard scoffed. Bluster! No one recalls that pattern. It's a ghost from court tales. But none dared ignore it, not even him. The masters huddled. They combed old ledgers, unearthed scrolls. They tried day and night to recreate what little they could recall of the design. But their attempts crumbled into mismatched symbols and crooked flourishes. And all the while, the heat of failure built inside the forge like steam in a sealed kettle. Margaret heard of it in the market. She was bartering for a bundle of dried leeks when 2 journeymen whispered near the fruit cart. They can't do it. Not a one of them. I heard the kings refused the last 2 attempts. Margaret's heart stilled. A ring with the worm crest. She knew it, not just from memory, but from touch. Years ago, in a quiet chamber of the royal forge, Thomas had shown her the design on an old velvet-bound folio. Few hands remain who remember this, he'd said, his finger brushing the curling symbol, a serpent woven into a crown. They'll ask for it one day. And when they do, it must be perfect. She traced it with her fingertip, studied it until it lived behind her eyelids. She never imagined the king himself would one day seek it again. That night, she did not sleep. She brought out a stub of wax and began to draw. Lines and spirals, tiny dots of memory arranged like stars. By candlelight, the crest emerged. Not guesswork, recall. By morning, it was finished. She folded the wax into cloth and began her walk, once more, toward the guild. When she entered, the masters were mid-argument. Scrolls littered the floor. A failed casting lay cooling on the anvil, cracked down the side like a broken oath. Reynard saw her and groaned. "Have you lost your way again, widow?" "I haven't," she said. Her voice was firmer now. "I know the pattern the king wants." The room froze. "You?" one of the younger smiths muttered. "Even we haven't—" "I saw it in the royal forge," she said. "Years ago, with Thomas. He showed me. I remember it still." They stared. Then Reynard laughed. Not like before. Louder, crueler. "Then by all means," he said, sweeping the floor with a mocking gesture. "Deliver us from shame. We'll even lend you a bench. Though perhaps the washroom would better suit your talents." Margaret stepped forward. "Let me try. One chance. If I fail, I walk away. You lose nothing." The village magistrate, who had been observing silently by the doorway, cleared his throat. "The crown awaits a ring," he said, "and pride will not carry it there. Let her try." Reynard's jaw tensed. Then, a single begrudging nod. And so, in a narrow alcove of the guild, with cracked stone underfoot and rusted tools at her disposal, Margaret lit a fire of her own. Not one of rage, but remembrance. The bench they gave her was no better than a pile of driftwood tucked into a dark corner of the workshop, where the smoke pooled thickest and no one lingered long. The tools were mismatched, the crucible dented, the bellows stiff. But Margaret said nothing. She rolled up her sleeves, tied back her graying hair, and coaxed the embers to life with a slowness that unnerved the apprentices. She did not bang, nor shout, nor boast. She listened to the fire, and then she began. Her hands, though hardened by years of soil and ash, still remembered the old rhythm. She twisted the gold not like a forger, but like a weaver, spinning it into shape with an elegance the others had long forgotten. When she etched the wax pattern into the casting mold, she murmured old words, not spells, but phrases Thomas had once used to steady his grip. Her fingers moved with eerie precision, a slow grace, not seen in that hall since the day he died. A few apprentices drifted closer. They leaned in, curious, eyes narrowing. "Look how she holds the graver," one whispered. "That's not luck," said another. "That's trained." By the second night, whispers spread like wood smoke. Margaret had requested no help. She came before dawn, stayed until the fire died. And each day, the ring neared completion. A delicate curl here, a gleam of enamel along the inner band, and at last, the crest. A crowned worm coiled thrice, head turned backward, fangs bared not in menace, but in memory. She carved it in one sitting. Master Reynard passed once and stopped. Margaret didn't look up. He stood at the threshold of her corner, silent, watching the way she smoothed the final edge of gold with a cloth dipped in vinegar and soot. He saw how she held the ring up to the light and tilted it, once to the left, once to the right, to ensure the balance was precise. And for a moment, something flickered in his gaze. Recognition. Not of the ring, of her. He spoke no word. But that evening, when the others had gone, he returned to her alcove. He stared at the piece she had left cooling on the cloth. The pattern was flawless, the proportions exact. And inside, in tiny letters invisible to all but those who knew where to look, she had etched a mark, a hidden symbol of the royal forge, a design known only to a few men now dead, and one woman left behind. Reynard reached for the ring, but his hand stopped inches above it. He stepped back. The next morning, the candlelight found Margaret asleep at her bench, her hands stained and still curled around her tools, and beside her, on soft cloth. At sunrise, the Guildhall was silent, not for lack of work, but from anticipation. The king's envoy had returned. He entered without ceremony, tall, cloaked in green, face unreadable. Behind him came 2 guards bearing the crest of House Aldemar. Every master stood in a line, arms folded. Their expressions masked nervous pride, but behind it, sweat gathered at the collar. Margaret remained at the back, not hidden, but uninvited. Master Reynard stepped forward, a cloth bundle in hand. He unwrapped it with care, revealing the ring. The envoy took it without a word, held it to the light, turned it, studied the crest, tilted it again. Then he spoke. "Who made this?" The room seemed to exhale, then hold its breath. Reynard paused. He could say it was his work, that he oversaw it, that he designed it. A lie, and one no one would dare contradict. Margaret waited. The envoy's eyes lifted. "I ask again, who made this?" The silence stretched like drawn metal. And then Reynard, proud, blunt Reynard, lowered his head. "She did," he said. He stepped aside. All eyes turned. Margaret stood still, hands clasped, soot still dusting her apron. The envoy stared at her, not in disbelief nor mockery, but curiosity. "You are?" "Margaret," she said. "Widow of Thomas, royal metalsmith, former apprentice, though never named." The envoy studied her. "I will report this," he said, "to the king. He will wish to know the name behind the hand." Then, in a move that silenced the entire hall, he bowed his head slightly, not in deference, but in acknowledgement. Not of title, of mastery. He turned, cloak sweeping behind him, and left. That afternoon, word ran through the village like fire through dry grass. The widow had done it. The masters had failed. She had not. Children whispered it behind fences, elders passed it across garden gates. And the women, the wives, the widows, the daughters, walked with new posture. The guild's silence could not contain what the village now knew. Margaret, the quiet woman with rough hands and a tired cloak, had bested them all with a single ring. 3 days later, a messenger arrived. bearing a summons from King Aldemar himself. Margaret was to come to court, not as witness, but as guest. The palace was not how Margaret remembered it. Once, she had glimpsed it only in passing, through iron gates, from behind Thomas's shoulder, while he delivered finished commissions to the steward. She had known it by its grandeur, its silence, and the heavy doors that opened only for men. Now, those same doors opened for her. 2 guards escorted her through arched corridors where light spilled through colored glass and the scent of lavender clung to the stone. She wore a borrowed dress, plain but clean. Her apron was left behind. Only the calluses on her hands refused to be polished away. In the royal chamber, the king awaited. Aldemar was not as fearsome as the village tales had made him. His beard was gray and neatly trimmed. His fingers bore no rings. He sat not on a golden throne, but in a simple chair beside a long table of unfinished commissions. When Margaret entered, he did not rise, but he smiled. "You are the one they tried not to name." "I made the ring." "I know," he said. "I've seen work from every corner of the realm. Yours remembered something we had all forgotten." He lifted the piece from a velvet case beside him, held it between 2 fingers. The mark inside. "That was your husband's?" "Yes," she said softly. "But the cut, the way it turns beneath the light, that was mine." The king nodded. "The truth, then." Finally, he gestured to a steward who brought forth a scroll and a seal. "I wish to name you Royal Metalsmith, with full rights, title, coin, place within the guild." A long pause followed. Margaret looked at the offer. Her heart did not leap. Instead, it settled. "I'm honored," she said, "but I must decline." The steward blinked. Even the king looked up. "I am not the courts," she said gently. "Not anymore. I belong where no title is needed to teach or to be heard." The king studied her. Then slowly, almost with relief, he smiled again. "Then may your forge burn longer than ours, and your lessons reach farther." He reached for the seal. "Still," he said, "let the record show. The ring that restored the worm line was wrought by the widow of Elderglin." Margaret returned home that same week. But she did not return to silence. The guild never mocked her again. Master Reynard, to his credit, bowed when he passed her door. She refused to take his bench. Instead, she opened her own workshop, a simple place just beside the square, where the windows faced the morning light. And there she taught. Not only boys, but girls. Not only orphans, but widows. Those whose hands bore strength without permission. Those who had been told they belonged elsewhere. In time, she took no coin, only questions. They say that years later, the king still wore her ring, and when foreign courts admired it, he would only say, "It was made by a woman who remembered what we forgot." The guild kept its pride. The court kept its ring. But the fire? The fire belonged to her. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I chose another story for you that you might like. Please consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss future chronicles. See you in the next video.